What if I told you that arguing is a sign of weakness? Sounds crazy, right? A philosopher saying arguments are for the weak. But that's exactly what Friedrich Nietzsche claimed in his work, Twilight of the Idols. Imagine this. We grow up believing that logic, debate, and reason are the highest tools of the human mind, that the smartest people are the ones who can win any argument. But Nietzsche, he looked at arguments with deep suspicion. To him, debate wasn't a sign of strength. It was often the last weapon of those who had no real power. And the root of his suspicion? A single man, Socrates. You probably think of Socrates as a hero of philosophy, the father of rational inquiry. But Nietzsche flips the story upside down. He didn't see Socrates as a blessing, he saw him as a curse. According to Nietzsche, Socrates brought something deadly into Greek culture, the tyranny of reason. From then on, everything had to be justified, rationalized, proven. If an idea didn't pass the test of logic, it was dismissed as worthless. Strength, instinct, passion, all had to bow before the cold light of reason. But here's the shocking twist. Nietzsche asks us to imagine. What if an Athenian noble, when confronted by Socrates' endless questions, simply shrugged and said, "Forget philosophy. I have a sword." Do you see where Nietzsche is going? He believed that Socrates' obsession with questioning and reasoning was not a sign of vitality, but of decline. A culture in its golden age doesn't need constant justifications, it simply lives its greatness. So why would Socrates feel the need to pick apart every belief, every instinct, every action, Nietzsche says, because Greece was already in decline? But this was just the beginning of his attack on reason itself. Picture this, the Peloponnesian War. Athens, at the height of its empire, faces a tiny island called Melos. The Melians wanted to stay neutral, hoping their Spartan roots would protect them, but Athens wasn't having it. They sent envoys with a chilling ultimatum: surrender and pay tribute, or be destroyed. The Melians tried to argue. They spoke of fairness of history, of their right to remain free. But the Athenians cut them off with brutal honesty. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. No excuses, no lofty principles, just raw, unapologetic power. And here's the kicker. Athens didn't even pretend to be noble. They didn't say, "We're defending democracy," or "the gods demand this." No, their logic was stripped bare. We are strong, you are weak, therefore we will conquer you. Thucydides, the historian, captured this Melian dialogue. And Nietzsche loved it. Why? Because it revealed the pre-Socratic spirit of Greece, confident, unapologetic, almost aristocratic. A people who didn't need to justify their power with moral arguments. Contrast that with what came later. Once Socrates introduced the tyranny of reason, nothing could simply be. Everything had to be explained, rationalized, defended. The warrior spirit gave way to endless dialectics. The lion turned into a lawyer. Nietzsche's point was simple but disturbing. Philosophy often arrives when a culture is already decaying, when it starts doubting itself, needing reasons to justify what once flowed naturally from its strength. And this wasn't just about Athens. Nietzsche believed that this obsession with rationalization became the disease of the entire Western world. But the story doesn't end with politics or war. Nietzsche saw this sickness of reason infecting even the arts through one of Greece's most famous playwrights. Now let's leave the battlefield and step into the theater. Ancient Greece was famous for its tragedies works of Sophocles, Aeschylus, and later Euripides. But Nietzsche noticed something with Euripides' Greek art started to change. Why? Because Euripides was close friends with Socrates, and just like Socrates, he wanted everything to be clear. Explained rationale. Take his plays instead of letting mystery unfold. Euripides often began with a prologue. A character would step out and tell the audience, "Here's what already happened. Here's what's about to happen. Here's why." The suspense gone, the poetic mystery flattened. Instead, you got explanations, rational clarity. And if that wasn't enough, Euripides leaned on the infamous deus ex machina. At the end of his plays, a god would literally descend from the sky to wrap up the plot, neatly tie off every loose end, and explain the meaning. To modern audiences, this might sound clever, like giving closure. But to Nietzsche, it was a disaster. Why? Because it betrayed the Greek spirit of tragedy. The raw, mysterious emotional power of life was being sterilized, sanitized, rationalized. Euripides turned the stage into a lecture hall. Instead of being swept away by awe and terror, the audience was spoon-fed logical explanations. Nietzsche saw this as a symptom of the same Socratic disease, the belief that only what can be explained, defined, and justified is truly valuable. But here's Nietzsche's radical twist. Sometimes acting without explanation, following instinct, impulse, or sheer pride can carry its own form of wisdom. Think about it. Isn't there strength in moving boldly even without having the perfect reason? Wouldn't you agree that some of life's greatest moments, falling in love, fighting for a dream, taking a leap of faith, come not from logic, but from courage? But this clash between instinct and reason didn't stay on the stage. It went back into the streets of Athens, where Socrates himself kept poking and prodding at the proud nobles of his day. Now picture Socrates walking through Athens. Not a handsome warrior, not a noble general, just a strange-looking man with a sharp tongue. He approached the city's elites, men of action, and asked them questions they hated. Why do you believe in this? Why do you act that way? At first, it might have seemed harmless, but soon these powerful men realized something unsettling: their convictions, their proud traditions, their instincts. Most of them had no solid rational foundation, and here's the irony. To Nietzsche, this wasn't a triumph of truth. It was the beginning of a downfall. Think about it. A culture at its peak doesn't need constant explanations. It doesn't doubt itself. It just lives its power. But Socrates, he embodied doubt. He poked holes in certainty. He made warriors second-guess themselves. Nietzsche even called Socrates the gadfly of Athens, a mosquito that wouldn't stop biting. But here's the twist. Socrates turned this into a kind of weapon. He had no noble blood, no beauty, no physical power. In fact, by Greek standards, he was an outsider, ugly, awkward, unimpressive. And yet, he used dialectic argument and logic as tools to challenge the powerful. Nietzsche saw this as the first victory of what he called the slave morality. Instead of the strong ruling through instinct and action, the weak found a new weapon: endless questioning. Socrates, by forcing people to justify everything, convinced Athens to bow not to strength, not to tradition, but to reason. And from that moment, the old spirit of acting because I can began to fade. The proud warrior-like confidence of the Greeks gave way to self-doubt, hesitation, and a craving for external validation. But here's the haunting part. This didn't stop in Athens. Nietzsche believed this slave morality would grow, evolve, and eventually conquer the entire Western world. So let's fast forward. Nietzsche argued that what started with Socrates didn't stop with him. Through Plato, it spread further, and eventually it bloomed into one of the most powerful movements in history: Christianity. How Socrates represented the morality of the weak, challenging strength, questioning tradition, and putting reason above instinct. His disciple Plato took it further, dreaming of a higher world of forms, a reality beyond this one where the true good lived. And Christianity. It pushed this logic to the extreme. Instead of celebrating earthly power and instinct, it exalted humility, meekness, obedience. It told the weak and powerless that they weren't losers. They were morally superior. Think about how revolutionary this was. For thousands of years, good was defined by the nobles, the strong, the warriors, the rulers. To be powerful was to be right. To dominate was natural. But Christianity flipped the script. Suddenly, suffering became holy. Poverty became sacred. The powerless claimed the highest ground not by fighting, but by redefining what good meant. Nietzsche called this the ultimate slave revolt in morality. The weak couldn't defeat the strong in battle, so they changed the rules of the game. They created values that favored themselves, and over time these values won. And here's the shocking part. We still live inside that morality today. When you hear phrases like, "the meek shall inherit the earth," or when you instinctively side with the victim instead of the conqueror, that's the legacy of this slave morality. But Nietzsche asks us a dangerous question. What if this morality, the one we take for granted, is not eternal truth, but just one phase of history? And what if it secretly keeps us weak, doubtful, dependent on something outside ourselves? This is where Nietzsche drops his bombshell idea. If we want to truly grow, we may need to create our own values, not borrow them from tradition, religion, or even reason. But how? What would it mean to step beyond the old morality and build new ones from scratch? Imagine this. For centuries, humans searched for morality outside themselves. Plato put it in the heavens. Christianity and God Kant in universal reason. Always something above us, beyond us, outside us. But Nietzsche asked, what if we stopped looking outward? What if, instead of obeying someone else's rules, we created our own? This was his daring vision of life beyond good and evil. Not bound by the morality of the weak, not enslaved to arguments, guilt, or external validation, but free, truly free, to affirm life on our own terms. And here enters Nietzsche's most misunderstood idea, the Übermensch. Often translated as the Overman or Superman, the Übermensch isn't about flying capes or comic books. It's about becoming the creator of your own values. The Übermensch doesn't ask, is this allowed? Is this moral? Will people approve? Instead, he asks, does this express my strength, my vision, my will to live fully? Think about how powerful this shift is. Instead of waiting for a higher authority, be it God, reason, or tradition to hand down meaning, you become the author of your own destiny. But here's the catch. To reach that level, Nietzsche says we must face something terrifying, the death of God. When Nietzsche declared God is dead, he wasn't mocking religion. He meant that in the modern world, the old sources of absolute truth had collapsed. Reason had questioned itself to death. Science shattered the illusions, and suddenly the ground beneath us was gone. Now what? Now Nietzsche says it's our responsibility. The task of creating meaning no longer belongs to priests or philosophers, it belongs to us. To live without excuses, to live without leaning on someone else's truth. But here's the cliffhanger. If the old values are dead, and we refuse to create new ones, what happens to us? So here's the danger Nietzsche saw. If God is dead, if the old values are gone, and if reason itself has eaten away its own foundations, what's left? Nothing. That terrifying void is what Nietzsche called nihilism. It's the sense that life has no meaning, no purpose, no direction. And here's the part that stings. Nietzsche wasn't describing some abstract philosophy, he was describing our world. Think about it. How many people drift through life with no anchor, no real values of their own, just consuming, scrolling, existing? How many of us secretly fear that everything we do is pointless? That's nihilism. And Nietzsche believed it was the greatest threat to humanity's future. But he didn't stop there. He asked, what if this void isn't just destruction? What if it's also an opportunity? Because when the old values collapse, the field is cleared, the chains are broken. And for the first time in history, human beings have the chance to create their own values. This is where courage comes in. Most people, when they stare into the abyss, turn away. They cling to old beliefs or numb themselves with distractions. But Nietzsche's challenge is different. Will you dare to stand before the void and say, I will create meaning. I will give shape to my life. I will build values from my own strength. That's the task of the Übermensch, not to be handed meaning, but to forge it, to stand taller than despair, to turn the abyss into a foundation. It's not an easy path. Nietzsche knew most people would shy away. But for those few who accept the challenge, he believed a new kind of humanity could be born, one stronger, freer, more alive than anything the world had seen before. But here's the question that lingers. If the responsibility of creating values is now on us, doesn't that mean we must become in some way like gods ourselves? Nietzsche once wrote, "God is dead, and we have killed him," but here's the part people often miss. He didn't say it with triumph. He said it with dread. Because if we've killed God, if the old foundations of truth, morality, and meaning have collapsed, then the weight of creation falls on us. And that's terrifying. Think about it. For thousands of years, humanity outsourced meaning. Priests, prophets, philosophers told us what was right, what was wrong, why we exist. We could lean on them, but now, the crutch is gone. The responsibility is ours. And Nietzsche asks, are we strong enough to carry it, to create values so powerful they don't need approval from anyone, to live without excuses, without higher authorities, without hiding behind tradition? This, for Nietzsche, is the greatest adventure of all time. A challenge bigger than any war, bigger than any empire. Because it's not about conquering land, it's about conquering ourselves. He called the one who dares to take this path the Übermensch, the figure who rises above good and evil, who doesn't just inherit values but invents them, who doesn't bow to meaning from outside but draws it from within. And Nietzsche believed this wasn't just philosophy, it was destiny. Humanity, he said, stood at a crossroads. We could sink into nihilism, becoming weaker, more resentful, more dependent. Or we could rise. We could seize the terrifying freedom of creating values and become something almost divine. But here's the haunting question Nietzsche leaves us with. If we accept this challenge, if we dare to step into that freedom, are we still human? Or have we crossed into something beyond? So who exactly is this Übermensch? Nietzsche never described him as a single person. It's more like an ideal, a direction for humanity, a call to rise. The Übermensch is the one who looks at the collapse of old values and doesn't tremble. He doesn't cling to outdated beliefs. He doesn't hide behind shoulds and musts. Instead, he creates. For him, morality isn't about obeying, it's about expressing strength. He doesn't ask, is this right according to someone else's rule book? He asks, does this affirm life? Does this expand my power? Does this make me stronger, more alive? And here's the shocking part. The Übermensch doesn't need to justify himself. No excuses, no endless arguments. He doesn't argue. He acts. Like the Athenians in the Melian dialogue, but on a higher level, he says, I do this because I can. Because it is my will. This is what Nietzsche meant by living beyond good and evil, not trapped by the categories of slave morality, not obsessing over whether something is permitted by tradition, church, or philosophy, but daring to live as a creator, an artist of life itself. Of course, Nietzsche knew this path wasn't for everyone. Most people need external rules. Most people fear the void. But he believed that humanity's future depended on those rare few who could embrace this challenge, who could rise above the old world of guilt and hesitation and step into a new kind of freedom. And here's where the story comes full circle. Remember how Socrates, with his questions, made the powerful doubt themselves? Nietzsche flips it again. The Übermensch is the one who no longer needs to question everything because he has the courage to become the answer. But this raises one last profound question. If the task of creating meaning is ours, if each of us must become in some way a creator, what does that mean for you right now in your own life? So here we are. We've walked through the ruins of old Greece. We've seen Socrates turn argument into a weapon of the weak. We've seen Christianity elevate humility into the supreme virtue. And we've watched Nietzsche stand at the edge of the abyss, declaring God is dead. But Nietzsche didn't stop there. He wasn't content with tearing down. He wanted to build, and his question still burns today. Will you choose nihilism or creation? Because here's the truth. If you've watched this far, you've already proven something. You're not satisfied with easy answers. You're not here for surface-level motivation. You're here because, like Nietzsche's solitary traveler, you sense there's something deeper, something harder, something real. The journey Nietzsche describes isn't comfortable. It demands that you let go of crutches, old beliefs, borrowed values, excuses. It demands that you face the void with nothing but your own strength. And then, from that emptiness, begin to create. That's the spirit of the Übermensch, not a superhero, not a fantasy, but a human being brave enough to invent meaning where there was none. To live not by second-hand values, but by values born from their own will, their own fire. So let me ask you, what would it look like if you stopped waiting for permission? What if you stopped asking whether your dream is reasonable or approved? What if you acted not because someone else said you should, but because you chose to? That's Nietzsche's final challenge. Not to imitate him, not to copy the Greeks, but to go further, to step beyond good and evil, to become the creator of your own life. And if you dare to try, then every struggle, every failure, every victory becomes not just survival, but art. Your creation, your values. So here's my invitation. If this journey lit something inside you, share your thoughts in the comments. What does creating your own values mean to you? And if you want more deep dives like this, subscribe so we can keep exploring together. Because remember, each step, each choice, each act of creation takes you one step closer to becoming what Nietzsche believed humanity could be, something greater, something freer, something beyond.